Good evening, friends. Welcome to the 42nd meeting of the study circle. I now request Mr. Suresh Madhavaraj to give introduction to today's resource person.
Good evening, friends. I welcome one and all for this 42nd meeting of the study circle. Today, I have the privilege of introducing our resource person, Senior Counsel, Mr. E. Om Prakash. Incidentally, it is Mr. Om Prakash who introduced me to this study circle. Today's topic is due diligence and title verification. During the starting years of practice, Mr. E. Om Prakash has been associated with banks, housing finance companies, and finance institutions. At one point in his career, you name any of the above, he would either render an opinion for them or appeared for them in the court. To my knowledge, as a junior member of the bar, he has given many legal opinions and attended property registration. Of course, as a designated senior counsel, now he is nowhere near them now. I take this opportunity to extend our welcome to Chennai Real Estate Agents Association. In short, it's called CREA, C-R-E-A. Our study circle members already know about resource person's knowledge of law. He belongs to a category of persons who believe in sharing his knowledge to everybody, particularly to the junior members of the bar. With that object only, the study circle was started. His interest is not only confined to the legal field alone. He has filed bill for the benefit of physically challenged persons to gain entry into not only buildings but also into the public transport. Even in our own High Court, the implementation of the same was personally monitored by the then Chief Justice. He is also actively involved in helping people who are in dire need of blood during the surgeries. He is a health conscious person and he has been motivating many. With this introduction, I request Mr. Om Prakash to take over the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suresh, for these very nice words. I extend a very warm welcome to each one of the participants for today's session. It has been a privilege and pleasure addressing the participants of the study circle. Over the period of time, we had our best of the in learning so many new things. We had many speakers who had addressed on various topics to us in this platform. So I consider it as a privilege to be part of a resource person also, so that I can share my thoughts and my views on a particular subject with all my friends. Today's topic is due diligence and title verification. When we speak about due diligence, we actually look forward a vast area of practice. Because as you all know, even in cases of companies where there is share subscription or investments being made, or other areas of amalgamation or mergers, whatever be the case, the first and foremost requirement will be a due diligence report in respect of these affairs. So this due diligence extends to various things. But in today's session, we are looking at due diligence in respect of title verification. This is a very, very primary area of practice, and it is of concern for each and every one of us, be it advocates, be it junior advocates in the bar, or as an individual, be it in any field. Every person at some point of time has a requirement to have some exercise to be done in respect of a title verification. It may be a case where you are looking for a purchase of property, or it may be a case where you have a property and you are intending to sell the same and the purchaser comes up with so much of queries on it. Or at times we may have to mortgage our properties to institution to raise funds. So there may be very many instances which we come across as regarding this title verification. In fact, you have heard about instances where people claim that this property is owned by me for more than 3 generations, 50 years, 60 years. I don't have anything. Everybody knows that I am the owner of the property. What is the big issue about it that you want it to be verified? So this happens at many a times. So therefore, as a due diligence in respect of title verification had been part and parcel of every individual. Now let us see as an introduction what is this due diligence and title verification. there is a definition as far as diligence is concerned. And interestingly, for the session, I just happened to rush through the Black's Law Dictionary. I find that even due diligence, common diligence is also defined separately. So I only took out a few sentences in respect of those definitions for the purpose of our session. Now, according to this definition, diligence means the attention and care required from a person in a given situation. Due diligence is defined as diligence reasonably expected from and ordinarily exercised by a person who seeks to satisfy a legal requirement. Now, in the part of definition of due diligence, it is also set out in the dictionary that a prospective buyer's investigation and analysis of a piece of property. So therefore, diligence and due diligence is also always associated with the title to a property, then as regarding a right to purchase a property. So for today's session, we will try to see as to what are the areas which we are looking at when we speak about this due diligence. An advocate, as part of the non-litigation work, normally takes up the assignment of due diligence and title verification in respect of immovable properties for asserting a title. To enable the purchaser to act on it, a creditor to lend money against security of such property, or to accept the property as security, or in cases of enforceability in a contract. So as an advocate, it is very important for us to understand the nuances as far as this law is concerned, try to develop a practice on these areas. As you all know, a law practice is tough in terms of establishing yourself, getting a security for your life. Initially, for a 5 years period, 10 years period, the juniors have a tough time. And we look at different types of litigations which will keep you going. For a non-litigant lawyer, I find that this area of doing title search, giving opinions on title to properties, or advising people on purchase of properties, or attending to this registration is one very good area where you can keep yourself going in terms of financial well-being. Like if you take up a case, you may get an initial fees, and further fees for which you have to get, you may have to wait for 3 years, 5 years, because we do not know when the case comes to an end. And no client will keep on paying you on monthly basis or on yearly basis till the case is pending. But if in case of a due diligence, if in case of a title opinion which has to be given, you take a fees, you give an opinion, the client is happy, he purchases the property, you help him out in the registration process, you complete the task. So as a junior, this helps in a big way. Likewise, I also look at a situation where apart from legal opinion, in the process, you get into a lot of learning. Now, with these backgrounds, as to this topic of due diligence on title verification, we are looking at title verification of an immovable property. So this session is only in respect of due diligence in title verification for immovable properties. As I told in the earlier part of it, we are not getting into other details, other areas of due diligence. Now, nature of property, when we think about title verification of a property, what will be the nature of property? It may be a vacant land, which is either a residential property or a land which is meant for industrial use or an agricultural land. Or it may be a land and building which is either residential or either industrial or commercial. Then you have the third category in respect of urban areas where you have apartments, either residential and commercial units in multi-story buildings. So broadly, when we look about immovable property for the purpose of title verification, we are looking at these areas. Now, why do we require a due diligence and title verification to be done? In a point of view that you are going to purchase a property, or in a point of view that you are going to advance money on such security of property. If that be the case, why is that we are looking that we need to have a due diligence and title verification to that? The first principles of law in respect of property purchase says, purchaser beware. It puts a lot of onus on the purchaser to, at the first instance, take all precautions which he has to do and satisfy himself as to the property which he is purchasing. Therefore, purchaser beware. This is derived from a Latin term called caveat emptor. Law recognizes in many places as regarding this principle. Now, any person requiring to act on a title to the property requires to be satisfied of such title before proceeding further. In fact, the courts as well as law expects that you should be aware as a purchaser of all the issues concerning the property. You should have taken all precautions before venturing out to it. Therefore, unless the purchaser takes all precautions, the law does not support. If proper due diligence is not carried out, it may sometimes result in liability. Leave alone the issue of looking at a property purchase, leave alone the issue of accepting a property as a security. You may even end up in a situation that there will be some liability fastened on you. So in the said context, let us examine certain basic principles and practices in carrying out a due diligence for the title verification. In this session, as part of this title verification, I am just giving an outline as to what are the areas which we are going to look at. And essentials for title verification is that basically the basic thing which we see is a title deed. When we speak about title to a property, a right to a property, the first thing we ask is that where is your document? So a title deed is one document in respect of a title to a property. So that is one area of it. This title deed helps us to also know how the flow of title had been. Suppose A comes to you saying that I am a owner of a property. You take the title deed of A and you verify, which will give a background as to how A became a owner of the property, or how the devolution of title had happened, who was the original owner and who sold to who. And if it is not a case of sale, if there had been acquisition of right by way of inheritance, who was the owner after his lifetime, who bequeathed the property. So these kinds of things you will be able to establish. Then by looking at title deeds, you also get into the issue of verifying it, verifying the originals, whether the person has. So this is one area. Secondly, we would like to always ensure on the encumbrance of the property, encumbrance on the property. Rather, we will look for a property to be encumbrance free. So therefore, we have to understand what is an encumbrance on a property and where is that we have to search for this encumbrance which will be reflecting on a property. Then thirdly, we have to essentially look at revenue documents. See, by just merely holding a title deed of property, for example, if I have a sale deed to a property and I claim that I am the owner, that may not be the end of it. I may have a sale deed, but I would have in the process sometime back lost possession of it. There would be somebody who is sitting on it and he would have got a possessory right to the property. He would have got the so-called revenue documents in his favor. Or there may be cases where I would have purchased a property, but my vendor would never had any possessory right. There would have been some other third party who is holding all possessory right as evidenced by revenue documents, namely patta, tax paid receipts, and so forth. So we will also look at what is these revenue documents and what is the importance it plays. And fourthly, you can look at government and tax dues. This is primarily on the point that you have to ensure that there is some taxes to be payable for any movable property. And there will be some government dues payable. Any enjoyment, it comes with a charge. Suppose I have an electricity connection to my house property. I need to have an electricity connection in my name, then I need to pay the regular charges. Likewise, if I have a water and sewerage connection, there is a requirement of payment. Now, other than this, one thing it establishes that when you look at this tax and government dues, that you are not in arrears, you are paid as on date, and whatever required to be paid has to be paid. And you will also ensure that whatever that connections actually stand in your name. It doesn't stand in any third party name, so that some other person doesn't come up and make a claim on it. Now, apart from this, if these dues are not paid periodically, if these dues gets into arrears and gets accumulated over a period of time, statutes will step in. The particular laws will step in. Take the Local Bodies Act or anything. Say, for example, the Chennai City Corporation Act, which would provide that if the property tax is not paid, that will operate as a charge on the property. So therefore, to ensure that there is no statutory charge or lien on a property, we may have to look at this taxes and government dues in respect of property. So finally, we will also have to look at approvals and compliances. So this is a vast area which will be, again, we can discuss in detail. Basically, you can understand on a point that any property requires an approval. If it is a land, a layout of land, the government has to approve that layout of land. There is specified authorities which are delineated in law to consider what are all the parameters for approval. For example, if it is a layout of land, provision for roads is essential. Connectivity of the plots to the other areas is essential. And some open space area is essential. And public utility places are essential. So once all these things are provided, then an approval comes. So therefore, without an approval, if you look at a property, you are likely to land up in issues where these compliances will not be there. So other than these approvals, there are certain other statutory compliances. Take, for example, statutory dues which become part of a claim over the property. In case of income tax dues, GST dues. So there are so many other enactments which step in which kinds of compliances which are required to be done. So this is a framework as to our talk which we are looking at 5 different areas. Now I will take you to each and every one and try to put forth some thoughts on it. Now first, at the case of title deeds. Now as I said, title deeds help you to establish a flow of title. Now in case of title deeds for a property, for an immovable property, we can classify into 2 categories. One is, for every property, there is a category of document called parent documents. And there is a category of document called present title deed. So if I am a owner of a property, I will have a title deed in my favor. Then likewise, for all the antecedent transactions which had happened on the property, I need to have all those parent documents. Suppose in a case, there is a plot of land, and this plot of land has changed hands for 3 or 4 people over a period of 20 years. And it is the exact extent in each of the documents. So each of these parent documents are also essential. And as a present owner, apart from holding my present title deed, I also require to have the originals of all the parent documents. So therefore, 2 categories, one is parent documents and one is title deeds. Now, while looking at these parent documents, you will find from its recitals as to how the property has devolved. You will be able to identify if there had been some issues on that. On a common parlance, we say that we need to look at least 30 years of title for a property, a flow of title for 30 years. Now, in a general terms, if you see, if there is a recital which says that this property was originally owned by a person in the year 1920, after his passing off in 1940, his legal heirs had acquired and they had sold it sometime in 1950. Then somebody had passed on to it in 1960. So if there is a chain of events, then this 30-year barrier doesn't stand in the way. In fact, you are bound to know the entire chain and you are bound to have the entire documents as to parent documents, which will show the entire flow of title. Then we'll come to the present title deeds. So one area which we have to look at is that verification of originals as to how the flow happens, whether there is a real connectivity. Given a case where we have seen that there will be a person called A who had sold the property to B. And if you go to the parent document, the earlier title would have not actually passed in favor of A. It would have passed in some other person's name. Then there may be some issues and ultimately they will come up and say it was one and the same name. So all these things are essentially to be looked at. An outer period is what we say is 30 years or in terms of whatever the recitals are found. Now this perusal of these documents will also give you an idea as to what is the stamp duty paid, what is the registration which has been done, where it is registered. Like you can come across registrar office which are situated in different parts of the city. Take the case of Madras city, or in some cases you take rural areas also. There would have been registered office in one particular place. But 10 or 15 years back, there would have not been a registered office in that place. So it would have been covered in another registered office. Take, for example, if you look at a registered office at Villivakkam, it was only from somewhere from 1994. Prior to that, all these were covered in registered office at Symbium. So likewise, so you will have an idea as to where the document is registered, where is the registered office you have to look for. So this is on the flow of titles. Now on this, what we also look at is when we are perusing the title deeds, you can look at if there is any restrictive covenants, if there is any unpaid seller's lien. These are all part of the recitals in the document. So a given case, a document may say that, take a case of a settlement deed, a father settling a property in favor of his son. He would have put a restrictive clause saying that you can have only life interest. After a lifetime, the property has to go to your children. So therefore, he is not an absolute owner. He may have a right to enjoy the property, but he is not an absolute owner. He has a restrictive in terms of he cannot convey the property. Likewise, there may be instances where while selling, a part of the purchase price would not have been paid. So therefore, a unpaid seller's lien would have been registered in the document with a condition saying that within 5 years they have to make the payment. If that is the case, then whether that was discharged or not, what is the document to establishing? So these kinds of very many covenants which are there in the document, which are in the recitals of the document, will be made available to us only if you have a perusal of this title deeds. Then likewise, if I said the devolution, if the earlier devolution is not by prior sale, my vendor, the property person who had sold it to me, if he had purchased, he has a sale deed. Suppose if he has not purchased this property, but he still claims to be a owner. So that may be a case where he was a joint owner of the property, either part of an Hindu joint family property, or he had succeeded to the property as a son or a daughter of yet another person, and his right flows from the Hindu Succession Act. Or if in cases of Christians under the Indian Succession Act, or in cases of Muslims, the Muslim law of inheritance. So in all these cases, your prior vendor may not have a title deed. So in that case, what is required to be seen is that whether there had been a clear flow of title, whether all the persons who had a right to the property had joined it. So all these areas which would be unlocked or which would be coming forth before you only if you have a perusal of the title. So this is the importance as regarding title deeds. Now, apart from this, from the title deeds, you will also come to know whether the property is owned by an individual or whether the property is owned by a company or whether it is by a firm. So therefore, parties to the document. Who are the parties to document? Now, based on these parties to the document, your further scope of investigation will also expand. If other than individual, there are other persons. So therefore, we will also look at those things which will come up. If it is a company and firm, what happens? Now, let us see what is the nomenclature of document. This is for a basic understanding. So it need not always be a sale deed, which is a title deed to a property, which you all know that a sale deed is a person A selling to a person B for a consideration. Now, other than that, there may be an exchange deed where A and B own different properties and they exchange among themselves the properties. And then partition deeds, where a property is either jointly purchased by a few people and after that they enter into partition deed, or a property devolved upon few people by way of succession or inheritance or a bequest in a will, whatever it is. And at a later point of time, they enter into partition deed. So that partition deed will be a title deed in the present owner's hands with a specific share being allotted to him. Then you have settlement deeds, which is basically most of the cases is a family settlement, which is a gift settlement which happen. And other than that, there can be other settlement deeds also, other than family members, where you really wish that the property be gifted to some third party, you may execute a settlement deed. Then you will have release deeds. Suppose if it is jointly purchased and one person wants to relinquish his right to the property. So he executes the release deeds to the co-owner and he takes his money and walks away. So therefore, the co-owner now becomes an absolute corporate owner for the entire property. And the title deed in his hands will be the original sale deed, which he jointly purchased with another person, and a subsequent release deed which comes. Likewise, this release deed also happens in cases of family properties being devolving among the family members. Then you may have rectification deeds. If there are some mistakes in the document, those are rectified by rectification deeds. And in cases where you have wills executed by persons bequeathing their right to the property, either to their children or to their kith and kin or to their friends, whatever it is. So that will becomes a document of title. Then you have gift deed by itself, apart from the settlement deed, which I said, gift deed by itself, a property being gifted to a person. Then same gift, if it is under Mohammedan law, it is termed as a hiba. This is a unique to the Mohammedan law. In Mohammedan law, a oral gift to a person is recognized as a transfer of interest in a property. Now that oral gift is called as an hiba, and a document which just records as to what is the oral transaction which had happened is the hiba document. Then you have cases of assignments. These may be cases where assignment of property from government or assignment from other authorities. So a document in the nature of an assignment deed sometimes being registered, and document in the nature of an assignment letter or assignment deed by a government at instances not being registered also. So these are all documents which convey the title to a property. Then you have kurchit. Kurchit is nothing but again one more way of a partition, which is traditionally there have been instances where families used to partition the property among themselves by having a family arrangement, sit together and they decide you take this property, you take this property. And they put it into the force, whatever they have decided, they bring it into action. Like huge tracts of agricultural properties, if it is divided among the family members, they will start cultivating by themselves. So that will be reflected in some adangals, chittas, everything which we are going to look later. So that transaction, which is actually a oral partition between family members, will be registered, will be recorded in a document which is called kurchit. Normally, a kurchit is not registered. There have been difficulties while appreciating these kurchits at many points in cases of litigations. But for the sake of our discussion, we are looking at a kurchit also as one of the documents. Then you have sale certificates in cases of auction sale, in cases of sale by courts, where a sale certificate is issued, and that becomes the document of title. So there are a lot of jurisprudence on this as to what is the stamp duty payable, whether it is registrable or not registered. If it is a sale certificate by a public authority, it doesn't require registration. So these are all incidental things. We will not get into much. Point would be that as part of title deed, a sale certificate can also be there. So for the purpose of due diligence and title verification, if a sale certificate is produced, you may have to get into it and work on how the title had passed it. So only for the purpose, I'm just putting it across. Then you may have core decrees, cases of declaration, cases where there had been disputes on properties and persons go before a court seeking for partition. So these court decrees sometimes declare certain rights as to vest in a person, sometimes declare that the right doesn't vest in a person. So depending on what is a declaration or what is a decree which is ultimately emanating from it is registered or sometimes it is not registered. So this will be all a nomenclature on the documents. So on the category of title deeds which we are originally looking at. Now when we say about title deeds, I also need to point out, invariably a title deed for an immovable property is a registered document. It has a stamp duty payable which is reflected in the document itself. Then it has to be registered before a sub-register office. So therefore, can we say that there is one registered document and that is the only document? It may not happen, because under the Registration Act and in terms of the registration process permitted with the sub-register office, we will find that when you register a document, you have an possibility of having a duplicate copy registered along with it. And some cases you may have a triplicate, 3 documents, 4 documents, 5 documents, any number. As part of the procedures rules under the Registration Act, registrar is entitled to receive 3 or 4 copies of the same document, register and affix all his seals in the documents and deliver to you. Primarily, this was required because, as I said in the case in the earlier session, earlier slide, that a title deed may be a partition deed. Imagine a situation where 4 persons divide the property among themselves and register a partition deed. Now, 4 different portions are there in the document. It goes to 4 different persons. Now, how to have a document for that? Each one is required to have a document. If it is only one original partition deed alone will be available. So therefore, law enables that you can register duplicate and triplicate. And the deed will record the fact that 4 persons are entering the partition. And among the 4 persons, the first person who is taking Schedule A property will be having the original partition deed with the entire stamp duty as his title deed. The second person who is taking Schedule B property will have the duplicate of the registered partition deed as well. So this was the primary purpose, and there may be in some causes which was required that the register office entertain these kind of registrations. And now this is extended for even a sale. In a sale deed also, you can have a duplicate or triplicate copy. So instance where you may have to have the original in a safe custody, but you need to require a duplicate to be carried. Therefore, you have it registered. So this is one category. So as part of registered document, you will have an original registered. You will have a registered document in all sense, which is a duplicate registered document. It will only carry a stamp, which will say that this is a duplicate of the original. And the sub-registrar will make an endorsement saying that the entire stamp duty required has been paid and endorsed on the original. And likewise, the very purpose of registering a document is that the registrar office acts as a custodian of these records. So therefore, any document at any point of time, if you are requiring to have a certified copy of it, you can approach the registrar office and take a certified copy. So whatever document you registered, they reproduce that and they certify that this is the original, this is the certified copy of the original which has been registered, and provide you a certified copy. So this may be required at times on certain contingencies. So I'm only putting it across for the purpose of an understanding that when we speak about title deeds, it may be an original title deed, it may be a duplicate registered title deed, it may be a certificate copy. This is essential for having a differentiation. Unless we get into the differentiation, unless we try to understand what is the differentiation, we are likely to be carried away that even a duplicate registered document is original. So this is on the title deeds as it is, which we are looking at. Now, when we speak about title deeds, as I said, in the initial stage, there are categories, vacant lands, and there are land and buildings. And then thirdly, I said there may be apartments and flats. So in cases of land and building, we will be clear. The title deed itself, a sale deed or any nature of document which I referred to, will contain the entire details with regard to the property, and that becomes the one and only document. For example, if it is a vacant land, I have a sale deed which gives the details of the vacant land by way of a schedule. If I have got a building, the schedule will also describe along with the building thereon. And in a common parlance, you also know that when a document is registered along with the building, there is a requirement in terms of the registration rules which says that you have to annex a form and give the building details also as to what is the extent of building, whether it has got a compound wall, whether it has got a well, and how many rooms or what are all the provisions, so forth. So that title deed takes everything. Now take the third case, which is a case of apartments, flats, commercial spaces in multi-story building. This is unique. So here the title deed has something more to be looked into. So that is the reason I am just trying to explain this as a separate thing. Now, right to apartments, flat, commercial spaces, multi-story buildings have unique features. Now, right to land is owned in undivided share. As you are all aware, there is one plot of land where 8 flats are constructed. Each one cannot have a separated, delineated land area. What will be given is that 1/8 share in the land, because you are owning a flat among the 8 flats. So therefore, 1/8 share in the land. So this we normally say is an undivided share in the land with a specific right to the building and enjoyment of common amenities in such buildings. Now, right to the property is created by a promoter. Now, these flats you are all very well aware, or even in commercial spaces which are developed in urban areas, you are aware that this is promoted by a person whom we normally call it as promoter or builder in an arrangement with the owner of the land. A person has a land, so a promoter steps in and says that I will develop this property. I will put up a huge complex of either residential flats or a commercial area, and we can sell the property to many persons. And sometimes the landowner will get a share of those developed property. So in this manner, the creation of this multi-story building happens through. So the document as between the promoter and landowner is generally known as the joint development agreement. This takes different nomenclatures. There are various nomenclatures which are coming forward. A common nomenclature is joint development agreement. So given a case where a landowner says that he is not taking any property out of it, he wants to actually sell the land. But a developer steps in and he doesn't want to buy the land. He doesn't want to pay the sale consideration for the land and have it registered in his name. He wants to develop that property, sell it to about 8 people if it is in 8 flats. So he will enter into a sale agreement and tell the owner that I will enter into agreement with 8 people and pay you the money. You give me the power of attorney. As your agent, I will convey this undivided share to 8 people. So therefore, they will try to avoid one sale transaction as between them, as primarily because the promoter's object is not to purchase the property, it is for the development. So apart from joint development agreement, there can be instances of only sale agreement and a power of attorney. But in a common things, we will look at this. Now the builder promoter act based on power of attorney. That is what I said. And promote the property by obtaining approvals. So here again, there is huge many things which we have to look out is that there are power of attorneys given by the landowners to builder with only restrictive powers. It may only say that to develop, to put out a plan, to obtain approvals from the local body, and so forth. It may actually not have a power per se. After a period of time, probably he may give a power, and there may be instances where landowner will say, I will directly attend to the registration and convey whatever UDS you want in favor of your nominee. So therefore, builders act based on the power of attorneys and various kinds of power of attorneys also. Now, in cases of flats and commercial spaces, all these documents are also form part of the chain of documents for tracing title. Now, other than that, as I said earlier, in a case of title deed, apart from the sale deed for UDS, you also have to look at one more document. So, all other earlier document, including a joint development agreement, is part of a chain of documents for the purpose of tracing, which you are bound to have. Now, let us move next to the title deeds in the hands of the owners of individual units, like these flats and commercial buildings, is the sale deed of the UDS in land. In fact, the undivided share of land, which I said in a very simple terms, if it is an 8 flat 1/8, provided all 8 flats are of the same area. So this again has a vast vast understanding which you have to make, because different areas of flats, then comes the question of whether proportionately persons are holding the land. And some places you will find this UDS is defined in terms of percentage. And some places you will find that only a portion of UDS will be sold. The builder or the landowner will still retain the other portion. So forth, whatever it is, for our purpose, we are looking at a sale deed of the UDS in land is one title deed. Likewise, a construction agreement or a builder's agreement, which delineates the constructed area and enjoyment of common amenities, is also a title deed insofar as this is concerned. Now, unless you have a construction agreement, by merely looking at a sale deed of an UDS, you cannot arrive at as to who is the owner or what he actually owns. Unless you look at the construction agreement, you do not know that he is the owner of a flat in 3rd floor. And this flat has having so much of area of built up area or carpet area, whatever it is. So therefore, in cases of the flats, commercial spaces in multi-storied buildings, the title deed, rather the present title deed, is twofold. One is a sale deed for the UDS, and the other one is the construction. Now, when we look at these things, incidentally, I'm also pointing out that in cases of flats, you may also have to understand what is the extent of land and what is the proposed built-up area for that particular crop development which is going to happen. This will give you an idea as to what will be the proportionation. For example, I say 1,000 square feet of land is there, and there is a proposal to construct 4 flats, which totally amounts to 2,000 square feet. So therefore, you can have a ratio clearly derived. For a 500 square feet of flat, my land extent will be only 250, because land is only 1,000. So if it is divided for 4 persons, it will be 250. So all those things you can arrive at. Now, in addition to that, in cases of all these developments, there is certain statutory requirements, certain regulatory requirements, which find place in the rules, which find place in the regulations of the local bodies, which specifies there will be a concept called floor space index. What is the amount of floor space index I can have for a building? This is dependent on various factors. Suppose based on the street, based on the location. Suppose if there is a street of 50 feet width, there can be a floor space index of 1:2, which means 1,000 square feet of land, I can have 2,000 square feet of built-up area. If there is a street of 100 feet width, rather a main road, or if the property falls in a place where it is called a SCZ or a IT SCZ or an IT corridor, the floor space index may be 2.5, 3 or 4, which means for 1,000 square feet land, I can construct 4,000 square feet of built-up area. Then these regulations will also set forth setback areas, which means in a building, from the boundary of the land where the building should be, there should be a gap of 10 feet between the building and the boundary. There should be a gap of 12 feet. There should be a gap of 15. So this again, depending on the area, depending on the number of floors, depending on the street width, the setback areas will differ. Then you will have nature of common amenities which are provided, like whether it has lift, whether it has a sump, whether it has a overhead tank, floor, the staircases, whether it is single staircase, double staircase, so on so forth. Then in cases of huge development areas, like blocks of development which are coming in within one campus, then you will have open space reservation area to be provided. So these are all the factors which you have to look at in cases of flats and commercial places. Then the developments and constructions are generally governed by the approvals in terms of the law, which will specify all these things, which I said, floor space area, setbacks area. And these are evidenced in the approval letters issued by either CMDA or the local body, the Chennai Corporation or municipality, whatever it is, depending on the construction involved. Then just for a sake of academic interest, you can see the construction agreement it now requires registration also in terms of the amendment to the Registration Act by the state is concerned. And there is one clarifications which are, this registration department often comes up with various clarifications. So one such clarification we try to bring in, which was one of the latest clarification, that there is no necessity to insist on a completion certificate for first sale. Then apart from this, you are all aware that all these developments are regulated by an enactment called RERA. So a RERA mandates that there is to be a registration if certain parameters are satisfied. If there is a building with more than 5 flats, if there is a building with more than so much of extent, it requires that it has to be registered with the RERA, and any development which is happening, the approvals, the RERA registration, everything has to be displayed. Either it is an advertisement or either in the site, all this display has to happen. With this, let us go into the next. Now, as I said about title deeds, there are persons who are parties to the title deed. Now, if I am a owner of the property, I may be the purchaser in a title deed which I am holding. Suppose if I am selling this property, I may be a vendor who is executing the document. So in all cases, I had already pointed out one thing. So these parties to the document need not always be an individual. It may be a company, it may be a firm and all. So based on that things, you may have more further things which are unfolding before you. Now, apart from that, an individual may not be able to himself do an act. So if I want to sell the property, I may have some personal difficulties, I may not directly do it. So in these instances, what happens is that this power of attorney steps in. I give a power of attorney to a person to act on my behalf. So this is one document which becomes essential when we look at the evolution of title or the title deeds. So I am just trying to put across some basic thoughts on a power of attorney. So whenever there is a case of a scrutiny of a power of attorney as part of the title deed scrutiny, you may have to look at validity. Primarily look at who has executed the power of attorney, whether he had an authority to it, and in whose favor he has executed. Then what is the nature of powers? As I said, in cases of development, the landowner may have given to the developer a power which is primarily only for the purpose of development. He would not have given a power for sale. And in cases where there would not been a power for mortgage, but somebody would have mortgaged the property, like the developer would have gone for a mortgage of the property. So all these things has to be established by going through the power of attorney document. So execution, nature of powers, then whether it is registered or not registered. Now, the law has evolved to a stage that today, if you have a power of attorney concerning an immovable property, it has to be registered. An unregistered power of attorney cannot be a basis for a transaction of an immovable property. So that is very clear. Now, instances like where a power of attorney is executed from abroad, a person is presently residing abroad, but he wants to do a transaction here. So he may not be able to come and do the transaction. So he wants to appoint a person. Now, in that case, he may not be able to even register it. So there the concept, there the law requires that the power of attorney which has been executed by a person who is out of the country and received by the person who is acting as an agent or attorney in the country has to have this document adjudicated before the registering authority. Primarily, adjudication actually means the required stamp duty to be paid on it. But in the process, what happens, it gets also an authenticity. So law requires that this power of attorney in original has to be produced before a sub-registrar. He will satisfy whether the stamp duty is paid, or he will ask the stamp duty to be paid and make an endorsement that the required stamp duty is paid. Then he will also satisfy himself as to the identity of the agent who is producing the document, because he has to produce a proof of his address, his photo identity. So this process is called an adjudication process. So whenever you look at a document, you can find that there is a registration or there is an adjudication endorsements which is found in the power of attorney. Now, validity of the power of attorney is also decided based on the death of the party. If the principal who had executed the document is no more, the power of attorney is not valid. Likewise, if the agent passes, the power of attorney comes to an end. It cannot be a case, a legal heir of the agent coming and saying that my father was a power agent, therefore on his death I become an agent. So it is not so. In law, the death of the party brings an end to the power of attorney. Then you will have multiple agents in the document. Then you have to see whether they have to jointly execute or they can severally execute. Like I give a power of attorney in favor of two persons. I would have specified to be jointly executed in any transaction. So unless both of them join, it is not valid. Then there is a issue about cancellation of power of attorney. Now, interestingly, in fact, the next point you will find registration of power of attorney has now been compulsory. As far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, this registration of power of attorney is also made as an entry in Book 1. I will later explain what is this Book 1 entry. It finds a place in Book 1. So therefore, any cancellation of power of attorney has to again go for a registration so that that entry gets it nullified. Now, will that alone satisfy the requirement of law? If you look at in detail, it may not, because you have appointed an agent, you have given him a document, you have permitted in law to act on your behalf. So unless a notice is given to the agent, an agent is aware that his agency has been brought to an end, there is a possibility of a litigation flowing out of these things. So therefore, in cases of cancellation of power of attorney, you also have to establish or satisfy yourself whether there was a valid notice to the agent, whether the notice, agent is also party to the cancellation. And in addition to that, you know that now requirement is that any power of attorney, if you want to rely upon a power of attorney and enter into a transaction, for the purpose of registration, you have to produce a life certificate that the principal has, a life certificate of the principal has to provide it, which establishes that he is alive and which also establishes that the power is in force. So this is one requirement. A production of the original is relaxed during this COVID period. That is the circular which you have referred to. Now this is on the title deeds. Now let us go to the next stage, which is encumbrance. You will get visualize that 5 circles which I had put. Apart from title deeds, we have said about encumbrance. Now how do we find out this encumbrance on a property? This is basically based on a search. Now where does the search you get it from the registration records. Now the search that is to be carried out to ascertain the encumbrance on a property is from the office of the sub-registrar. See, in terms of the registration manual rules of Registration Act, any person is entitled to have a right to search in a sub-registrar office. You have to give an application and you are supposed to be given the registers, which are called indexes. You will go and you can have a search. But over the period of time that is not happening, then you get into a concept of applying for a search certificate, which is basically encumbrance certificate. So you give a details as to this is the property I'm looking, this is the survey number, this is the boundaries, this is the extent. Registrar will make a search and he will give you a certificate saying that I have made a searches and these are all the entries which are found. Some encumbrance certificate doesn't mean that it is free from encumbrance. Encumbrance certificate is a document which gives you a report on the search, which will say that these are all the registrations in respect of the property. Now, this is further expanded with the advent of the digital technology. Now you have a website of the registration department. Any individual can go and make a search by themselves. You can have a search in terms of survey number, in terms of address, everything. And you can apply the encumbrance certificate online in this website and you will get that. So you can make a search and take a report also, or you can apply for an encumbrance certificate in that and you can get it. So these are all the process by which you make a search and find out whether there is an encumbrance on the property or not. I am not getting into what is the encumbrance you are looking. I am only saying what is the search we are contemplating and how it helps you in understanding this. Now in this, you will also look at one point which I pointed. The books of the registrar are classified as book 1, 2, 3 and 4. I will only just rush through as to what it is. A book 1 entry is basically the registration in respect of any transfer of interest in a property, like sale, deed, settlement, whatever we said is all reflected in the book 1. So therefore, a book 1 entry is for a public view. Any entry in a book 1, any public has a right to have a search. Likewise, any public also has a right to take a certified copy of document which is registered in book 1. Then book 2 is actually a register which the registrar maintains when he refuses registration. So for the purpose of our discussion, let us not get into details of it. And book 3 is basically documents which are very personal in nature. Suppose I execute a will and I want it registered and I wanted to put it in a custody with the sub-registrar. So these are all documents. I may execute a declaration. I may execute an undertaking. I may make some solemn statement or an affirmative affidavit. These are also documents which can be registered, which are all entered in book 3. Then you have book 4. Traditionally, these book 4 entries again were personal documents. Like power of attorney was only book 4 entry. If I execute a power of attorney register, it will be a book 4 entry, which actually means either the executant has a right to get a certificate copy or a beneficiary out of this document has a right to get it. No public was entitled to have a certificate copy of a book 4 entry in a sub-registrar office. That is where I said now power of attorneys are made as a book 1 entry. So it reflects in the book 1 entry itself. So when you get an encumbrance certificate, you will get all these things. So this is on the registration records, which is prima facie a search option for a person who is doing a title investigation to find out what are all the encumbrances on the property. Now let us proceed to the next one. Now, nature of encumbrances. When we said that we are making a search and we are finding out what are all the entries which are reflecting. Now, what is the nature of encumbrance? It may be a mortgage by registered mortgage deed, which is simple. And there are various classifications of mortgages. Let us not get into it. So on a property, there can be a mortgage right created. So this will be part of a registered document. So when you apply for an encumbrance certificate, it will reflect that. Then there are mortgages by deposit of original title, which is called equitable mortgage. There had been times when this creation of mortgage by deposit of title deeds was not required to be registered. There was no registered document. So you cannot even find out whether there was a mortgage by deposit of title deeds. Only possibility is that you will ask for original. If the original is not there, you presume that there is some kind of an interest on the property because original is elsewhere. That can be a case of an equitable mortgage. Now what has happened is that there have been very many changes which have come. Now this deposit of title deeds normally is evidenced by a document. Either it is a letter. Traditionally, if you go by the jurisprudence, court said even a letter or an intention expressed by way of certain terms is sufficient. But now that has taken into a different shape. People record it as a memorandum saying that person A, who is owner of the property, is creating a mortgage by deposit of title deeds, and he sets out these are all the documents I have deposited, and this is the schedule of property in favor of P. That memorandum is now compulsorily registrable, and that memorandum also has to be stamped in accordance with law. So therefore, mortgages which are registered, which are reflected by registered mortgage deeds, including the deposit of title deeds. Now, apart from this, there can be charge, lien, which are created on the property. Charge may be statutory charge, or charge may be, as I said, a lien of an unpaid selling price, purchase price is also a lien. So this will be part of the encumbrance on the property. Likewise, there could have been a specific charge created in favor of some authorities. You are all aware, in part of business, you may require to establish a charge with some statutory authorities, namely customs or income tax, whatever it is. So these are all charge, lien, which are all nature of encumbrance which can come. This you may be able to find out from the document. This you may be able to find out from the entries, which is the encumbrance certificate. And there are instances where properties are given as collateral securities. I may not have taken a loan. There is no liability on me, but there is somebody who has taken, and I am standing as a guarantee and giving my property. So this again will be reflected part of this mortgage or equitable mortgage or any other document. Then there will be prior agreements. Then prior, as I said, power of attorney is registrable. Cancellation has to reflect. There would have been a sale agreement entered into somebody, which is registered. Sometimes it is not registered. So therefore, you have to establish. So for the purpose of establish, these are all areas of encumbrance. You have to get into it and find out whether this is now free of encumbrance, whether the agreement has been cancelled or whether the agreement has lost its validity, or if there had been any case and if it had been lost. And if it is a power of attorney, which was earlier point of time, whether there was a proper cancellation, as I said, whether there was a notice to the agent, and in terms of it, if there is present power of attorney, or if the owner comes forward to enter into a sale transaction, then what happens to the earlier power of attorney, whether he has still cancelled it or not. So these are all based on the searches you find, based on the encumbrance certificate you get, it is reflected. Then you have the attachment by courts, then revenue authorities, then statutory authorities. There are very many areas today where properties are subjected to attachment. Income tax dues, central excise dues, commercial tax dues, and creditors' applications, creditors' proceedings before court, where they take an attachment before judgment, and revenue dues, where revenue authorities report an attachment. As I said earlier, tax payments, cess payments, and electricity dues, all these things are now covered under different statutes. So they operate as first charge, or they operate on, and there have been days when these attachments will not even reflect in the encumbrance certificate. Nobody used to inform the sub-registrar. So you may have to carry out a search by other process and find out whether it is there. Of course, of late, you find many of these attachments are reflected. Even a letter written by an authority nowadays is being made part of an entry in the encumbrance certificate. The other day, I was very shocked to find a sales tax authority writes to the sub-registrar saying that give me an encumbrance to the property because the owner of the property is in due of sales tax to the state. Now, this letter is recorded as an entry in the records. So when I apply for an ECU, getting it as a document number. When ultimately we apply for the certified copy and we find it is only a letter asking for an encumbrance. So there may be so many instances of this. then pre-existing lease on the property. So these are all the nature of encumbrances which you have to establish by verifying the title deeds, then verifying the encumbrance certificates or searches which you make, and rule out whether the property is free from income. So entire exercise is looking at how the due diligence has to be applied and how you have to get into these things. And we will proceed to the next. Now, in cases of companies, as I said, an executant to a document need not be an individual. It may be a company which is owning the property. So there is another area of further diligence and verification which has to be done. I'm just rushing through primarily any requirements in respect of companies. Your area which you have to look is the register of companies. There had been times when you have to go to the register of companies, apply for an inspection to be carried out in the registers of a particular company. Nowadays, as I said, this is also available online, and you have the website of the Ministry of Company Affairs, which maintains all these registers, everything. So in the Ministry of Company Affairs website, which is MCA, you get all these details. Primarily what you can look is that you type a company's name, you will get the CIN, which is called Company Identification Number. Or if you have a company identification, type the number, you will get the entire detail. So you will get when the company was incorporated, who are the shareholders or who are the directors. So whatever searches you want in respect of companies, there are registers under the Companies Act to be maintained, and there are forms which have to be filed with the register office, which include and details regarding the assets, which include details regarding the charges which are created on the assets. So therefore, one is CIN verification, company identification. Then you have directors verification. You may have to ascertain who are the present directors, whether there were past directors, whether the same person continues. Then in addition to that, you may also have to look at whether there is a proper authority by the company to either purchase this property, to sell this property, or mortgage. Now, how this authority comes? This authority comes by way of a resolution passed by the board of directors, and in some cases, these resolutions are required to be passed by the shareholders of the company, which is the general body of the company. So therefore, for this purpose, you also have to look at ratio of immovable property for sale. Suppose if a company owns only one immovable property, there is no other fixed asset of the company. It has got other businesses. Now, if this property is being sold, and if it happens to be the one and only property or the substantial asset of the company, then a resolution by the board of directors is not sufficient. The law requires, Companies Act requires that there should be a special resolution by the general body of the company, which means 2/3 have to concur that the property can be sold. So these are all things which you have to require in respect of companies. Then verification of charge created. Now this charge creation operates in different areas. There may be a mortgage on a property by a company, and you have a mortgage registered sheet. Therefore, prima facie, you know that there is a mortgage. Now this mortgage in respect of a company asset has to be separately registered as a charge with the register of companies. Now, if it is not registered, what happens? Companies Act provides how it is dealt with in cases of liquidation. So let us not get into it. For our purpose, we are looking at charge. Now, other than a mortgage, in a case of a company's assets are normally treated as current assets and fixed assets. There will be a charge called an operating charge on the current assets, or a floating charge. So this will not be evidenced by any mortgage deed. This will be an arrangement between the company and creditor, or with any third person. But this will be reflected in the ROC. So therefore, for that purpose, in cases of companies, you have to look at. Now, title to a company may have come from by way of merger, demerger, amalgamation. A company would have been owner of a property. Later, so therefore, it would have had a title deed in its name. Later, this company would have been merged with B. So therefore, the title now becomes a title of the merged unit, which may have a different name, which may have the B's name. We do not know. So these are all part of the due diligence which you have to carry out to find out how this title is posed. So incidentally, we point out in case of merger and demerger, there is a different stamp duty and registration fees which are stipulated by the government. Then let us go to the next. Now, properties of the partnership forms. As I said, companies, now properties of partnership forms. Partnership forms, again, it can be a registered partnership or it need not be a registered partnership. So how do you get to know that? You have to find out whether there is a registration certificate issued by the registrar of firms. Now, if it is a registered partnership, again, as in the companies, you may get enough information from the registrar of firms. You can get the certificate copy of a Form A, which will show when the firm commenced its business and who had been the partners, whether there was any change of partners, whether there was any reconstitution. So all those details you'll be able to get it. Suppose if there had been instances where two partners come in, one partner brings in his immovable property as a capital to the firm, and later point of time, there are two other partners who have joined, and this original partner who brought in, he's relinquishing his right in the firm and he's retiring from the firm. So there may be instances where he may have to execute the release deed, which is the requirement of law. For time, we have been seeing that if in cases of partnership, if there is reconstitution that is sufficient, the present partners become the owner as the partners of it. But it is not so as far as the present law is concerned. The Stamp Duty and Registration Act speaks about it. More particularly, there are lots of amendments which are there in the stamp duty, which makes it mandatory that stamp duty has to be paid in cases of release deed by partners who are stepping out of the partnership firm by releasing the right over the immovable property. So these are all the other areas in respect of partnership firm. Therefore, stamp duty implications has to be seen, Registration Act implications has to be seen. Now let us proceed further. Now, we have looked at the second area. Now let us come to the third area. I said about title deeds, then I said about encumbrance, which is all the searches which I have referred to it. Then the third area is the revenue records. As I pointed out while I was speaking to you about that slide, that revenue records establish a possessory right. In law, we normally say that title follows possession, possession follows title, all those things are fine. But once I'm claimed to be a owner of a property and I have a title deed in my favor, I should also establish that I have a possession to that property. Now, these possession comes from revenue records. To just give an outline as regarding revenue records, over a period of time, for the purpose of land administration, various enactments or various regulations have been put in place and various powers are given to the revenue authorities. Roughly speaking, in cases of urban areas, mainly in cases of metropolitan cities, from the days of the British period, you have got something called collector's certificate. They collated all the records and the land details and issued certificates to the persons who were in possession. So therefore, that became collector's certificate. That took a different nomenclature at a later point of time as town survey land registers. Then it became that, therefore you get a TSLR, which is a town survey. In all other areas like rural areas and other places, this land rights passed on based on land tenures, and there had been various settlement acts like Zemindari abolition, Inam's abolition, and Raitwari abolition. So these are all different enactments. Now all these enactments and this passage had in fact created certain records. There are settlement registers. So these are the records which gives you a details as to the land administration by the government. In turn, by recording your names into the land records, you also establish that you are in possession of the property. So this is the outline. So for confirmation of a possession to a property, one essential document is the revenue record. The other way of putting it is that if the revenue record doesn't stand in your name and there is some third party who is having a revenue record in his name in respect of your property, which you are aware and you don't take any steps, that is where law says it is a right by way of adverse possession. The person is in possession in adverse to your right. Therefore, he acquires the title to the property. So there again, you will know that if in cases of individuals, it is 12 years which has to pass. In cases of government, it is 30 years. So this is the importance as far as revenue records are concerned. In fact, there are so many things which flow out of these revenue records. Like I can tell you that cases where acquisition happens, any acquisition by the government authorities happens based on revenue records. They don't see who is the title owner. They don't come to your title deed. They don't go to the sub-registrar office and ascertain. They will take from their revenue records and find out if A is shown as a owner in a property. A notice in respect of acquisition will go to only A. You may have purchased the property, you may have a title deed, you would not have done the mutation, therefore you will pay. So this is the important. Now, revenue records essentially establish the possessory right of property. If possession is confirmed. Now, in the revenue records, I've just pointed out an hierarchy because each of this record has some kind of an implication for the hierarchy. Like district collector, sub-collector, then you have district revenue officer. Why am I pointing out is that there is a kind of adjudicatory mechanism here also. A Tahsildar may issue a patta. A Tahsildar may effect a mutation in a revenue record, recording your name. Suppose if there is a grievance on that, on an extent it may be, on a record of name it may be, you will have an appeal remedy to the district revenue officer or the revenue division officer and sub-collector, collector. So this is a small understanding. What I am also pointing out is that when you peruse these revenue records, you may have to look for these persons. They are the persons who are entitled to issue a certificate or an extract of the revenue. Yes, let us know first. Now, revenue records. Now, such revenue records, as I said, are known as town survey land register in cases of urban lands. Then there are individual pattas. Patta is actually a document which is given to you as an extract of the revenue record, which will show that for a particular survey number, for a particular extent, you are the pattadar, you are the owner of the land. Rather, you are in possession of the land. Most of the things, the courts say that patta doesn't establish a title, but there is some jurisprudence on the point also. If it is supported, it establishes. Let us not get into that. So I'm only putting it across nature of these documents. There will be joint pattas, like properties, huge extent of agricultural lands, or in cases where even urban lands. Take the case of a flat development. The original landowner had a patta. Now 8 people are holding an undivided share. So you will have a joint patta. It is also essential that you get a joint patta for this land. Then you have UDR patta, user data register. Revenue authorities at point of time update all these records. They will update the registers based on the user data. So based on that, if there is a patta given to you, it is there. So these are all maybe a kind of a preliminary patta, temporary. There is requirement of an inquiry, then you will get a final patta. Likewise, it is called Toraya patta, which is nothing but a rough patta. Then Gramanattam patta. This is one area of lot of litigation which has happened. Gramanattam land is actually house site lands, but it is meant for community use. So there are laws which evolved, or government policies which evolved after a period of time. Gramanattam lands have been given to the persons who are in possession. So recognizing that a Gramanattam patta will be given. Then lands which are assigned for Adi Dravida welfare. So for those lands, you get an Adi Dravida patta, then Mara patta, assignment patta. So just I'm giving out classifications. Then urban properties are recorded in town survey land register, either as I said, collector certificate. Then when I say that there is a patta given to you, part of a revenue record, what is the document which the revenue authorities have? Revenue authorities have a document called Chitta book. It is a book in the hands of the revenue officials used to ascertain record. So whenever there is a sale happening and you want a name to be transferred in you, and you go to the authority like a Tahsildar, you first primarily may give it to the revenue inspector. He will record it, and the Tahsildar will record by proceedings and reflect in this Chitta book. So any transaction which happens, as in the title deed flows from one person to another, the revenue records will also record in the Chitta book. So this, sometimes the Chitta book is also a record based on Jamabandi. These are all rural areas. Once in a while, there will be a Jamabandi called for by the sub-collector or collector. They will ascertain what are all the lands available, who is in possession, who is in cultivation. So this Jamabandi will also, as I said, the cases of Kurchik, when family partitioned the properties and they are in individual possession. During this Jamabandi, they will report saying that we 4 brothers have now partitioned. So based on that, an entry will be made in the Chitta book. Based on that, you will get a patta. Likewise, there is another document called Adangal. This is a very, very primary document. Adangal document is normally held by the village administrative officer, the lowest in the rank of the revenue authorities, who is holding this document for the purpose of tax collection. So every Adangal will be an extract of Chitta book, which will give details of all the survey numbers, owners, nature of cultivation, who is in cultivation, and a tax amount which to be collected. So these are all revenue records which will be available. Yes, we can proceed to the next. A permanent revenue record based on entries in Chitta and Adangal updated at particular period of time is called a settlement area register. So over the period of time, what happened is that these Chitta books were getting, so sometime the government stepped in. If I am correct, it is at the instance of 1969, they brought in a scheme called updation of revenue records. So there they got all these documents updated and brought out as a printed A register. For every village, you have an A register. That is also called a settlement A register. And this periodically happens. If my knowledge is correct, it happened in 1969, then it happened in 1984, and thereafter it was supposed to happen sometime later. I think that was not happening. So whatever it is, as part of revenue records, you have one consolidated document called a settlement A register, a printed register. Then as I said, you have Chitta, then I said Adangal. Now what is that is reflecting in this A register, Chitta, Adangal is survey number of a property, subdivision of survey number, then patta number and the patta owner, the name of the owner, then extent of property and nature of the land, whether it is dry, wet, whether it is cultivable, non-cultivable, then who is the cultivator. So this cultivator and assessment is only found in Adangal. In a Chitta, you will not find. Chitta, you will only find the owner's name. Then usage of land and nature of cultivation. Likewise, I said tax paid on land is called KIS, for which you get receipt. Now, why I am pointing out is that for the purpose of establishing possession, as a part of your title verification, you are entitled to ask a person to get you an extract of the settlement A register, which normally will be issued certified by the Tahsildar alone or a sub-collector. Extract of a chitta, again it can be given only by the Tahsildar or a revenue officer. And you can get an adangal from the village administrative officer. So all these extracts you can get. You can look at it for a long period of time, 30 years, 50 years. You can have an assessment in continuation to whatever the title deeds which are reflecting the flow of title. Then you have the field measurement book, which is normally called FMB. Now, interestingly, all these documents are also being brought out in digital form. You have a website where you can enter this survey number and other things, and then you can get. In some states, I find that even the FMB printout you can have from the website itself. Then the nomenclature of the property in revenue records is referred normally as Paimash number. So this is one thing which you have to find. Properties were originally referred as Paimash numbers. Likewise, properties in cities were referred as CC numbers, which is nothing but the collector certificate. Then later these took shape as the survey numbers or survey field numbers. Then you have resurvey numbers, and in cases of city properties, you have town survey numbers. So these documents will have different things. Like if you look at a title deed of a year 1950, you will find only a survey field number, SF number. Or if you look at a document of 1930s, you may find only a Paimash number. But you will find a later document of 2000 or 2010 saying that it is for the same property, but giving it as a town survey number. So in these cases where you may have to look at the revenue authorities, as I said, some insight can be had from the settlement A register or the printed A register, which will show what is the old survey number, new survey number. Or you can ask for a correlation certificate from the revenue authorities. Likewise, to ascertain the entries in the revenue records, possessor area, which I said, you can get an extract of all these documents so that you can have a continuity of all these things. As I said, the website for this is this eservices.tn.government.in. So this is on the revenue records. Now the other area which I pointed out, payment of duties, tax dues, and tax. So any property which you own, if you claim that I am a owner of a property, I have a title deed, there is something or other related to a charge, an amount which has to be paid to the government. If it is a land, there is a vacant land tax. If it is an agricultural land, there is a kist to be paid. If it is an urban land, there is an urban land tax. But of course, it depends on the extent. The urban land tax is levied only after beyond a particular extent. Then if it is a building, land and building, you have property tax. Then as I said, if you have certain connections like water connection, sewerage, electricity, so all those things carries many things. Most of the trouble areas are that the mutation of these will not happen. You would have purchased the property, you will not have the property tax changed. It will continue in your father's name or grandfather's name, sometimes in your vendor's name, it will be there. Then when an issue of ownership comes, you will not be able to establish. So as I said, possession revenue documents can establish. To some extent, all these tax receipts can also establish a possession. And likewise, of late you have income tax dues, GSTs. This I said reflects as an attachment. Then apartments, in case of apartments, you have association society dues. And in case of property devolving by will, there is always a revenue recovery check which you have to do because wills in respect of urban properties required probate proceedings where you have to disclose the value of the property, and that goes to the revenue authorities for a cross check. They may again review something. You may not be aware they would have initiated a revenue recovery. So these are all the areas on the tax and everything. Primarily, this gives an insight as to arriving at the title verification. Then, as I said, approvals and statutory compliances. For layouts, you have a layout approvals. For buildings, you have got building approvals. And each of these building approvals, there are so much of terminologies involved, so much of documents are also. Like for any building, you will have two things. One is a planning permit, one is a construction permit. This will speak something different, that will speak something different. Then when you look at these approvals, you will be able to arrive at these deviations. As I said, a construction permit comes with an approved plan, which will give you a calculation. If you go to the corner, it will show what is the land extent, what is the proposed building extent. Based on that, it will say what is the FSI sought to be achieved. So with that, you will be able to identify the deviations which are happening, whether it is external or internal. Then this registration authority requires these things. There is some thing. And in cases of industrial buildings, in cases of multi-storied buildings of commercial nature, there are different sanctions involved. As you know, there are clearances which have to be obtained. If for huge properties, there are clearances which have to be obtained even from Environmental Ministry of the central government. So unless the assessment, and an impact assessment study is done, an approval will not be given. You would have seen even huge residential buildings got into so much of issues on this environmental impact assessment not being provided for. So to my knowledge, there are some litigations even still pending till up to Supreme Court. So depending on the nature of building, depending on the usage of the building, these are all the other areas which you have to look at. I'm only trying to give a bird's eye view of what things which you have to look for. Yes, next. Now, having said all these things, when I said title deeds, when I said search reports, when I said statutory clearances, when I said revenue records, essential thing for a due diligence is that you have to first identify what are all the documents you have to see. Then you have to examine those documents, scrutinize those documents, and make searches by yourself and cross-verify with originals. Most of the issues which we find is that originals would not be available or originals would not have been verified. And after a period of time, when you go for it originals, you would have taken so much of efforts in collating everything and coming to a decision. You would have asked for originals. The person would have come and I lost the originals along that. That is the biggest risk factor which you find in a title verification. Because originals not being available with person is always a adverse situation. There is an inference to be drawn that there is an issue. Either it may be the originals are deposited with somebody and a loan is taken, therefore there is a mortgage, or it is deposited with somebody as a collateral security, therefore he exercises some charge on it. Or in cases, the originals are part of some litigation before a court. Because today, when you go before a court and a litigation arises in respect of the property, parties are required to file all the originals. So therefore, it may be part of the originals filed before the court. So a party can easily make a statement that he has lost. And many people think that once the document is lost, I will give a paper publication, I will take an affidavit that he has lost and he has given a paper publication, there is no claim. And that is the end of the matter. That may not be an end of the matter. That may be one means of establishing in a bona fide case, in a genuine case. Imagine a situation where such exercise is done and still somebody comes and says that I have the originals, I have a charge of the property. That will prevail, not the statement and the paper publication. So you will lose on it. Now, part of this examination, you also have to look at the survey number, subdivision, boundaries, and how to identify the property. Then most of the times this extent becomes difficult because you will find an extent to have been given, but in terms of linear measurements, extent will be a different extent. So that has to be done. So you may have to advise as part of due diligence and property inspection that let there be a personal inspection. And as an advocate, it is not for us to take up. You may have to only ask a valuer to do that inspection, give his report, correlate with the revenue documents and the title deeds. Then in cases, sometimes when it is cases of purchases, as a precaution, you also call for a publication to be made, saying that so-and-so is owner of the property and he intends to sell. So therefore, if there is any adverse claims, the claims may be made within 15 days. If it is not received, it shall be deemed that there is no claim. So this is only an option. Then part of this inspection, apart from all these things, one thing which I find is that at times you may also have to verify the financials of a person. It may be an individual, it may be a company, because only if you look at the financials, you will know whether there is any liabilities which are there. I will now explain as to why the consequences to these liabilities also. Like part of these financials, you may have to look at if there is any tax implications which are arising, because of which there are attachments. So this we will look at next. Now, court proceedings and implications. As I said, legal proceedings may be pending on a property which we cannot know. In a common term, we always say that there can be a search of a suit register in a court, but in practical purposes, it is very, very difficult. Though you can search a suit register of a particular court where the property is situated, but a litigation can lie in any court throughout the country depending on the nature of litigation. So any transaction which happens on a pending proceedings is likely to result in a transaction, in a transfer being void. And there are provisions of the enactment which specifically says that pending list, there shall not be a transfer of a property. This is section 52. And as I said earlier, these insolvency proceedings which arise, if a person had been having financial difficulties, there is all likelihood that some creditor would have gone to court. He would have filed a suit for recovery of his money and he would have taken some attachment. And in many cases, there would have been insolvency proceedings which are initiated. And in the old insolvency regime also, and lately you have an insolvency and bankruptcy court, where you will find the day an insolvency resolution is initiated against a company. For individuals, it has not yet commenced. For a company, everything is in moratorium. And there is possibilities under the code to examine all past transactions for 2 years. So that can be in the category of preferential transaction, avoidance transaction, fraudulent transaction. So in this context, to at least arrive at, to at least look at what kind of implications are there, you may have to look at the financials. In spite of all these things, still if this happens, you are at the risk of facing that. Then I said searches which can be made in the court. But this is very, very difficult. Now with e-courts coming up, there is a possibility of a better search can be there. But traditional search is that for a litigation on a property is ask for the originals. And if you see the originals, if it had gone through some litigation, invariably there will be a court seal. And this will not be prominently available. It will be available in some back pages only. So the moment you find a court seal, you may have to question him why this court seal. Then so many things will unfold, saying that there was some litigation with my neighbor, there was some litigation on my boundaries, therefore we went through this, all these things. Then you will be able to understand what it is. As I said, legal actions by the creditors. So these are all on the searches. And yes, some more things which I have looked at it, I will only rush through because we are running short of time. I also thought that I need to take up some questions so that clarifications will be there. But on properties, you may also have to look at Land Reforms Act, Urban Land Ceiling Act, because there had been a lot of litigation on this. Of course, Urban Land Ceiling Act has been repealed, but proceedings which were initiated, I had a personal experience or an instance of coming through a land ceiling proceedings initiated against a property in 1974-75. They have recorded in the revenue records as an excess land and made an entry. Nobody bothered beyond that. There is somebody who had sold this property, somebody who had purchased, constructed building, everything. Now suddenly a notice comes saying that it is a government property. You either purchase by paying the government dues or you vacate it. Fortunate for the owner, there had been periodical updation of patta, so therefore he had a patta. Then approvals for the building was there. So by filing all these things before the court, we demonstrated that he had been in possession. Though there was a land ceiling proceedings, the government had never taken possession. So these implications are still continue to haunt us in very many cases and land reforms. And in addition to that, in fact, you will find land acquisition proceedings which happen. As I said earlier, land acquisition proceedings happens based on revenue records. Notices are given to the person in whose name patta stands. It is not based on the title deed. So these are also areas which come as a issue for a consideration when we are having a title verification. Then lands which are reserved for particular purposes like forest and archaeological survey areas. And interestingly, if you find there is some archaeological importance, a place of archaeological importance, the peripheral areas, the appurtenant areas, there will be a ban. There will be a ban saying that the building not more than the ground floor can be constructed. So these you will not be able to find out from the title deed. This you have to find out from verifying the revenue records and finding out. Then heritage buildings. So I think with this, an outline as to a due diligence and title verification I have run through. And of course, there is trust properties. This is again private trust and public charitable trust. This is a huge area of discussion which can take you for one session. This will be the last slide which I can run through, pointing out what are all the statutes which guide this process. The Transfer of Property Act, Contract Act, Hindu Succession Act, Indian Succession Act. As I said at the first instance, when I said the juniors who can look at due diligence and verification of title as a source of their income, it in fact enlightens you on many of these provisions. It in fact enables you to have a look at these provisions, so by which you can enrich yourself. So these are all the enactments. I'm not taking much of time running through this. We will anyhow circulate this presentation in the WhatsApp group for you to understand. So with this, I am just giving to a conclusion, and I will be happy if I can take a few questions from our participants on any of these issues. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having spent your time. Though I had scheduled it for about 1 hour, it has taken a substantial time. I thank each of the participants who had been present. And incidentally, we had members from this Chennai real estate agencies who had also wanted to join. I thank each one of them who had joined. I hope it was enlightening for them also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senior, for taking us through the entire gamut of verification of title. I have Mr. Ilangovan raising his hand. I'm just unmute him.
Sir, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ilangovan.
Sir, very good session, sir. It's very useful for the young lawyers, sir. with regard to the title opinions. My question is with regard to the CMD approved layouts, sir.
Yes.
There are some sites that will be allotted to schools or park.
Yes.
That subject lands were later sold as housing sites to individuals, and later pattas are also granted, and housing houses are also constructed there after getting approval from the competent authorities.
Yes.
Whether such sale is valid in the law, sir?
Strictly speaking, it is not valid because in terms of the original approval, these plots are bound to be set apart for public purpose. So it cannot change it to a different user. But over the period of time, people have done this, and you have a judgment of the Division Bench of Madras High Court by Justice Kaur, if I am correct, on a case by one of the person who had raised this issue before the High Court in a case of a public property or a plot which was for the public purpose at Besant Nagar. Which though 20 years have passed, many people have purchased some patta taxes. Still courts said the original allotment or original approval was for a public purpose. That purpose cannot be defeated. In fact, now you have support from the registration department which says public bodies or water bodies, all these properties cannot be registered. So even if it had registered in our hands, it cannot hold fine.
Sir, one other question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, with regard to the temple property or mud property,
yes.
In those years you can know that Adivaram, Kudivaram, that kind of things are happening.
Yes.
So suppressing that facts, even CMD approvals were granted to the construction of flats and everything in subject lands.
Yes.
If I purchase any such land, what would be my remedy, sir?
You are risk. In fact, I think you have attended the section by Mr. V. Srikanth on HRNC Act, where he brought out very clearly, under the provisions of HRNC Act, there cannot be any such alienation which can happen. So, any purchase of this temple properties, you are at a biggest risk, be it whatever nature. Many people claim that they have got a patta, they have got everything. So, these are all different facets. A patta may be depending on the possession, there for a continuous they would have given. That doesn't even title ultimately is what the temple has devolved upon him, is not a title, it is only a right of enjoyment. Therefore, that will not, this right of enjoyment and a patta, you cannot claim that today I become a title holder, therefore I am selling it. So all these temple properties you cannot deal with, all the enactments are there, they are having a role over that.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Jay Kumar has raised his hand. I'll unmute him, sir. Yes, sir. Jay Kumar, sir.
Yeah, Om Prakash, fantastic presentation. I learned quite a lot. After so many years, this branch of law is refurbishing to me. My question is this foreign power of attorney.
Yes.
I had the same problem last week.
Yes.
6 of them are still different countries.
Yes.
Of course, same power of attorney, but I don't want it as a common power of attorney. 6 different consulate has to attest it. Then under the Registration Act, you have to adjudicate to registrar. Should I have to do 6 adjudication or only 1 adjudication?
You have to do 6 adjudications, sir, because each document will be treated as a separate document and each requires a stamp duty to be paid.
If it is 6 documents, if it is 1 document?
So that one document has to be done, that's all.
But only 1 stamp?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I learned quite a lot. In fact, I made a lot of notes from what you said. And these expressions are totally new to me. Thank you. Thanks, Shiva Shanmugam, for putting me on to Om Prakash.
No, sir, you raised your hands. 1 second. Sir, one Mr. TV Shekhar has also raised his hand. I will unmute him.
Now that the representatives of the Builders Association are there,
Yes,
because I have been in this field for a long time, but what I find is when the builders develop 200 flats, 300 flats, now the purchasers are coming to us even before going to the bank for a loan to see whether the title is okay or not. Then they are giving a CD containing some 1,000, 2,000 pages because they have bought 14 acres, 20 acres from different persons. Now in Bombay, I believe these kind of developments, they must have a solicitor's opinion in the file which they give, and that is taken for granted. Otherwise, we are finding it difficult to give an opinion having some 2,000 pages of documents, and should that kind of a rule also should come here because it may help the flat purchasers. Instead of going to different, there may be 200 advocates also giving opinion. The 200 purchasers may be there. So
You are correct. That is in fact a requirement which has to be done. In fact, the Tamil Nadu Apartment Ownership Act has been enacted, come into force, but still it has not taken a big shape. As you said, in Mumbai, all these flats are regulated only by societies.
Yes.
In Bombay, Maharashtra, there is no title deed. A sale deed for a flat is not given.
Right. Only shares are given.
What is the shareholding in society?
Yes.
So therefore, at the first instance, the society ascertains the title. As you said, one attorney report to the society and a society's registration is taken as a valid document.
And
Beyond that,
and his opinion also is taken for granted.
Correct.
And he is also liable if there is any mistake. That is what judgment also says.
We also hope that we raise such situations in Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu, yes.
Thank you.
And one more thing.
Yes, sir.
As Mr. Jaikumar said, for the foreign power of attorney, notary public attestation also is enough. It's not as if only in Gulf countries where there is no notary public, they may have to go to the consulate. Places like UK and USA and all, they have notary publics. That is enough.
Yes. Attestation by notary public is enough, but
Enough.
later when it comes here, your adjudication has to happen.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sir, Vaidyanathan has raised his hand. I will just unmute him, sir.
Sir, it's such an exhaustive subject, and it is a vast subject which has not been taught in any law institute even, and it has not been discussed even in any seminar. It shows your involvement and courage to disseminate your knowledge. I am very thankful to be here in panel. And one more question, sir.
Yes, sir.
There is a doubt. If there is a property was purchased by the copy of document sale, upon the copy of document, it was purchased back over 20 years. Now it has to be purchased by, it has to be sold. If you tracking to its title deed, it's a EA copy prior to parenting. Now, existingly, the vendor has the original document, but prior to his vendor, he had only CA copy. In such a moment, what shall we do?
See, by virtue of the number of years which you claim has passed, the risk factor has now reduced. Other than that, always that risk factor is there. I had one instance, in fact, there is a case reported or somewhere also. One person has properties in T Nagar, it's a valuable property. Person is owning a property more than 25 years. No claims are taken, but it ultimately boiled down to a situation. 30 years back, the then owner had mortgaged the property with Indian Bank by deposit of equity for a loan taken by a company in Nellore. Now, this Indian Bank had filed a suit for recovery of money in Nellore sometime in 90s. Like any other bank suit, it was pending for non-disposal for a long time. 96 DRT Act came into force. 2000 DRT established in Hyderabad. Case gets transferred to DRT Hyderabad. Notices are served. Nobody came because the person was by the time sold and nobody was there. And 2008 or 9, recovery certificate is issued and person has come. You will not believe, court said that there is a valid mortgage. If the present owner has to discharge, you have to discharge and take it. That is where in one of the note I said, if there is no due diligence, there is a likelihood of a liability being casted on you.
Exactly.
Likewise, by passage of years, the risk may have come down. Maybe 20 years, if you have to establish that there is no court, there is no claimant, no court proceedings, no claimant, encumbrance is clear, possession is clear, periodical tax, everything is clear, then that risk factor comes down to very less. Instead of being 95%, it becomes 0% or 5%. But as I said, 1 in a million case, this might have happened.
In case, if one more question, sir.
Yes.
In case if the document was innocently, it was missed out, misplaced. In such case, what we have?
See, if it is a bona fide case of where document has been lost and process has been taken by making a publication and making out an affidavit and police complaint, non-traceable certificate, and the ultimate purchasers are bona fide purchaser for valuable consideration, court always protects them. See, that is always there. Any purchase by a bona fide person for a valid consideration is protected. It's only a balancing between those two things. As I said in the earlier case, if there is a valid mortgage established, biggest risk is the mortgage. Because once a mortgage is always a mortgage.
Yes.
There you cannot even plead I'm a bona fide purchaser. Mortgagee gets the preference.
Yes.
Otherwise, in cases of lost documents, you have this process and you have to go with it.
Fine. And last question, sir. Last question. We can verify the disputes and litigations in revenue records and registry records, but whereas we could not find any documents from the court proceeding. If there is any court proceeding over the property, we could not be able to trace the same. If there is any remedy for that.
See, as it is court litigations, unless there are attachments, you cannot get anything from a sub-register office. Only if there is an attachment or a decree registered, you know. Otherwise, pendency of a court litigation, you cannot find from the sub-register. No question of encumbrance or anything. Likewise, you cannot find it from the revenue records also. So what has to be done is that traditionally the court systems provides that for every court there is supposed to be a suit register. And a suit register is supposed to have a schedule of property if the suit involves a right to the property. Now, if you go and see the e-court system which is coming up, they have provided for this. In a search of an e-court, you can find there is a schedule referred. So if any suit is relating to a schedule, you can get that. That is where I said, traditionally how we find out is that any court proceedings, we had known that documents has to be filed in the court. So if it had gone to a court, there used to be a seal. That is how any court proceedings, when documents are filed, they used to affix a seal first at the first instance. And if this document is marked in evidence, it will be with a seal saying that who has let in evidence, who has referred to this document and marked it. So by those endorsements, you should be able to make it. We had many cases where we could find it that some strange, that is why you call for all the originals. Don't even believe that parent documents, I don't have originals. If they have to produce, that will disclose all these things. From that, you may be able to get it. Beyond these things, normally we take a declaration from the party saying that there was no litigation on the property and proceed.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Sir, good evening, sir.
Reading us, being a senior law officer. I don't know whether I will.
Sir, it is an excellent session, sir. It is an excellent session, sir. You covered everything, sir. You covered everything, sir. My only I am anxious in one or two matters, sir. One is in all banks, not only in state banks, in all banks, for the past 10 years, they give instruction to the advocates to look after so many things. And most of the things you have said, it is covered, sir. But what the instruction says is the advocate has to go to the revenue office and personally verify. Advocate has to obtain encumbrance certificate personally. Advocate has to make a search in the sub-register office personally. Advocate has to visit the register of companies and verify whether the any charges are registered. Advocate has to verify the suit filed register. Like that, so many instructions are there. But most of the advocates I find, they only put NA, and give opinion. That is also accepted by the bank. But subsequently, when any problem arises, the innocent advocates are harassed like anything, sir. They are, in fact, in some cases, they are even impleaded as an accused in the CBI cases. And complaints are filed before the Bar Council. So it is going on for a few advocates. So because of that, I find that many of the senior advocates are not interested in giving any title investigation report. But my worry is these junior advocates who are giving this type of title report. They are penalized even though they are very much innocent. Sir, you are a senior advocate. You are in the disciplinary committee in the Bar Council. And if any occasion arises, please take care of those advocates, sir. If they are innocent. And most of them are innocent, sir. And yes, they are removed from the panel. And they are depaneled and circular. Their names are circulated to Reserve Bank of India. Like that, so many things are happening, sir. That is my own worry, sir. Second point is, in many cases, when we bring the properties for sale, suddenly they file a suit for partition saying that it is an ancestral property and all those things. And see, I just want to know one difference. Whether is there any difference between Hindu undivided family property and ancestral property? Sir? If it is an ancestral property, I know how to take care of the thing. When they say suddenly they say Hindu undivided family property, that creates some problem. Is there any difference between ancestral property and Hindu undivided family property? These are my two issues, sir. And I thank you very much, sir. It is an excellent session, and for the past 1 hour 45 minutes, I am closely following it up, and so many. Even though I have been dealing with the TAR report from the day one, and many issues from you I learned, sir. One point I think what is not covered is that now we have to make a search in the CERSAI register also, sir.
Yes.
CERSAI register. That is the one more thing, sir. I just want to bring it to notice. That's all, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. You actually added a valid point. Now there is a registry created under the SERFACI Act, which says Central Registry for Security Registration. It's called CERSAI. Sir was referring to that. Now it is mandatory requirement that all charges created in favor of banks and financial institutions has to reflect that. So there will be one more available avenue like ROC can be made. Thank you very much, sir. And when sir was saying about legal opinions, of course, there is one Supreme Court judgment which said that a legal opinion, based on a legal opinion, you cannot prosecute an advocate unless there is a clear case of a criminal intent or malafide everything. So people are protected. Even in Bar Council, we are also looking at it. The other point which I wanted to just pass it on, take this opportunity and tell is that junior advocates have to be encouraged on these legal opinions. As you said, they should be able to visit these places, make their personal searches, everything. So that will be a very good initiative for the juniors to learn. But from the banks and financial institutions, you have to increase the fees. I have seen over the period of time that banks and financial institutions have been reducing these fees on title opinion, saying that I will give you more cases, you may have to only accept this much money. If it is becoming more remunerative, I think more juniors will take up and they will be able to do. Anyhow, thank you very much, sir. Thanks for joining the session and sharing your thoughts.
Sir, good evening, sir. And you are really covered, and our appreciations are first, because right from my LKG level, ABCD to I level, you have covered the subject very well, sir. With which we could know a lot of things, learn a lot of things. So my question is regarding the land regularization. And to some extent, I heard that the land regularization is not required for the very old documents, like 1980s or 1990s document, 30-year-old documents. Is it so? And are all the plots has to be regularized as per the regularization order?
Yes, you are referring to the approvals, regularization of the unauthorized plots.
Yes, sir.
So there had been so much of litigations on it. At one point of time, the court said there will be a cutoff date as 2009. Then there was a cutoff date of 1984. So there are so much of jurisprudence evolving on it. A simple understanding is that any layout of plot, any plot for that matter, has to have a approval for that, right? If there had been some plots which are not approved, or it was not part of any kind of approvals, and it is there from 1980s or 70s, what is to be looked into is that as part of construction, there would be a regularization done. If you go for a construction of a planning for plan construction, if you go for an approval of a plan for construction, the authority will ask you whether your plot is approved. And if it is part of approval, they will take it up and give you an approval for the building. Suppose if it is not part of the approved layout, at the time of giving your construction approval, they will collect a charge from you, which is called a betterment charge, which is 10% of value or something. And they will also ensure whether the plot is connected by streets and whether the plot doesn't stand in the way of any other adjoining plots and all these things. And in that approved plan of building itself, they will record this. They will make a note of the plot area. They will make a note of the road. If that is done, that takes care of everything. In all old cases, what is you have to look is that if there is an approval of the building, and part of the approval, if the charges have been paid, and if that is done, that will take care. If that is also not done, if the plot has been continued vacant, there have been never any point of time, it may require a regularization. Only thing is, if it is beyond a particular period of time, your regularization is easier and lesser charge. If it is after a period of time, you have a stringent regularization norms and you have to pay more. This is the only difference. And there are court cases which are going on. Even as of now, last 3 years, government had been extending some time for this regularization of unregularized plots, and court cases also pending. We really do not know what will happen for the recent time. But any plot which was prior to 2009, you are covered by the first regularization scheme itself. Had it been applied, it is taken care. If it is prior to 1984, it is no requirement. And in between period, if it is part of an approved construction of a building, then it is taken care, is my view.
And continuing on this, can I sell this, because it is a Panchayat approval, I do have a document prior to 1990s, as you rightly said, 1984 and 90s. Can I sell the document without applying for a regularization and register the documents in somebody's name?
Yes, you can sell it. Today there is no harm on it. There had been one point of time that the registration should not happen. Now all those things have been decided by courts and said registration can happen. It is the risk of the purchaser who purchase, because he may have to shell out some huge money at a later point of time, or he may lose the property. But registration can happen, no issues.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, no, sir. Thank
Sir,
you.
Sir, one Arun Kumar Rajan has raised the issue. What is the specific time period within which the adjudication has to be done with regard to the power of attorney?
Same as case of registrations, 4 months time. In cases of documents which has to be presented for registration, you have 3 months plus 1 month under the Registration Act. For adjudication also, you have the same period of 3 months, before which you have to submit to the sub-registrar. And if it's stamp duty to be paid, you have to pay the stamp duty. You have to give an affidavit that you are the agent. You have to give your identity proof with photo identity, everything. Then adjudication happens. At instances, what happens is that based on the receipt also you can maintain. Suppose a power of attorney is executed in say January 2020, but the person had sent it to me by courier or post or anything. It reached me only in March. So therefore, whenever you go for adjudication, they also ask you the means by which you received this document. If it is by a post or courier, you may also have to give that postal receipt or the postal cover. So all cases of adjudication, most essential is that you also have to preserve the cover by which you received the document from abroad. So from there, you will get the time period of 3 months.
Thank you. My question is not directly related to title verification, but more on the issue of registration. When a property gets sold as part of a larger transaction, which is a slump sale agreement. So have had this issue with the sub-registrar office in Chennai, where a land was sold as part of a much larger transaction, which was a business transfer agreement. And under the Income Tax Act, you cannot mention the value of individual assets. So you cannot also mention the value of the property in the sale deed. Instead, you can only mention that for the purpose of stamp duty, we have taken the value of the property, we have paid stamp duty on the value of whatever amount. And then, of course, if they decide to undervalue, or I mean, that is undervalued, they can, of course, go into that issue. But where, I mean, I ran into an issue with the sub-registrar office where they were unwilling to even register the document, stating that without mentioning consideration, how can we register the document? However, I've done it for a smaller value properties for other clients, but unfortunately, due to confidentiality, I couldn't share those documents with the sub-registrar. And it's run into quite a big problem where they are not. And then the COVID situation came up, so the whole document got stalled.
We have a latest circular by the sub-registrar office to address these issues. In fact, that circular speaks about cases of merger and otherwise, where specific value is not assigned to the property. They have devised a kind of formula. They say that on the share value this much. I exactly do not know what it is, but there is a latest circular. You can visit the website of the sub-registrar office, the registration department. You have a circular which came only about 1 month or 2 months back. So that circular might help you.
Okay, thank you.
It's made clear that when there is a slump sale of an enterprise as it is, or cases where there is a merger or demerger, or cases where companies is taken over by a by process of the Companies Act provisions, they have now devised a means by which saying that this will be the value which you can consider and based on which you can take a stamp duty and registration. So you have to see whether you can work on this. If it is not, then only possibility is that you have to approach the court and get it sorted out.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Again, thank the senior for taking us through the entire gamut of.
I just want to add one more thing. I need to thank my friend Mr. Ashok Pati, who had been very considerate in helping me with this wonderful PowerPoint presentation and giving me a lot of inputs for me to prepare. Thank you, Ashok Pati.
Mr. Aditya, Srikanth, Vaidyanathan, and Vijay Krishnan have thanked you for the wonderful session. And on behalf of the participant and on my behalf, I thank you for taking us through the entire gamut of tracing of title. I thank you, sir. And with this session comes to an end. Thank you.